And the footage you're about to see was taken at the Station nightclub. A lot is known about this case, but one thing I haven't heard occurs about 5 seconds from this point. It's a woman, and it's made me wonder who she is, and the reason I'm doing this story. With that being said, let's get into it. February 20th, 2003. A cold winter night at 211 Cohasset Avenue, West Warwick, Rhode Island. Hundreds of people gathered at the Station nightclub, eager to see the rock band Jack Russell's Great White. It was a night of music, drinks, and fun, and absolutely no one could have imagined that it would end in one of the deadliest nightclub fires in U.S. history. Unfortunately, one of the most memorable things about that night could have been fun and games was what I told you about at the beginning of the video. A sound of pure terror, a sound that will echo in the minds of survivors and myself forever. And by the end of this story, you'll understand why. The small venue was packed. Over 460 people were crammed inside a space meant for a maximum of 404 people, which should have been the first sign. Another sign should have been that they were using pyrotechnics. Many clubs and venues like that did not allow acts to use pyrotechnics because of how volatile they were. In fact, Jack Russell's Great White specifically had been denied permissions to use pyrotechnics on a number of occasions. But where those denials didn't happen, they did what they wanted without any repercussions. Until February 20th, 2003. The concert started like all other Great White concerts do. The band took to the stage and immediately anticipation and excitement filled the air. Then, at 11:07 p.m., the first chords of Desert Moon blasted through the speakers. And at the same moment, tour manager Daniel Bichelle set off the band's pyrotechnics. If things didn't escalate after that, it might have been a beautiful display that everyone could have enjoyed. Unfortunately, within seconds, what would have been a spectacle turned to horror. The sparks meant to entertain struck the club's walls covered in a highly flammable polyurethane foam. Now, it should be mentioned at this point that the club where the concert was happening had been inspected months before the fire. The club got 9 minor code violations after the first visit and got the all okay after the second. In hindsight, this is surprising because the club was using polyurethane foam for soundproofing, which is against code because of how flammable the material is. Maybe if the club had gotten the appropriate code violation, this incident wouldn't have happened. But they didn't, and so it did. The fire spread instantly, racing up the walls like a living thing, feeding off the oxygen. At first, the crowd cheered, mistaking the flames for part of the show. After all, Great White loved doing crazy things alongside their performances. What was to say this wasn't part of it? However, as the fire reached the ceiling, it became obvious that this wasn't an act, and the cheers turned to screams. People who survived the night remember things in slow motion, but in reality, everything happened very quickly. Just about 20 seconds after the pyrotechnics started, the band knew something was up and had to stop playing. Jack Russell, the lead singer, tried to calmly alert people, but when it became obvious that this wasn't happening, there was no calming anybody. The band managed to leave the stage and the venue's fire alarm started to sound, but when it rains, it pours, and that alarm was not connected to the local fire department, so the department couldn't appear on the scene early enough. To make matters even worse, the building had no sprinkler system, so the crowd could get no reprieve whatsoever. The quickly spreading fire made escape important, but the thick cloud of smoke that plunged the club into darkness made escape difficult. There were 4 possible exits, and maybe if people were thinking clearly, there would have been a somewhat even distribution of people across the exits. Unfortunately, panic blinded most people, causing them to head towards the front door, through which they first entered. That front entrance, which was really just a narrow doorway, it became a bottleneck of pure terror. People tripped and fell on the bodies, just continued to pile up on top of one another, and as you would imagine, those trapped underneath were crushed by the sheer force of the desperate crowd. Many people died that day, not just because of the fire, but because of people trying to escape the fire. What's worse is that according to some survivors, bouncers blocked off one of the exits, particularly the stage door. Apparently, because the stage door was restricted entry, anybody who wasn't a member of the band could not go through that door, even if the whole building was being engulfed by flames. About 5 minutes after the fire started, the first West Warwick fire engine arrived at the scene. Seeing as the club's fire alarm was not connected to the fire department, multiple people, including one police officer, had to make 911 calls for this to happen. 3 more fire trucks arrived after the first one, and then there were more. At the end of the day, there were hundreds of firefighters on the scene, some of them arriving from nearby Coventry and Cranston. Firefighting efforts carried on through the night, and the nearest hospitals that casualties could be transported to was Kent. By 1:30 a.m. that next day, all affected individuals had been moved to the hospital, and said hospital was filled to capacity. Unfortunately, the casualty count was high. Almost a quarter of the number of people in attendance were killed, either by the fire or by the stampede. One of them was Great White's guitarist, Ty Longley, who went back to get his guitar. And another was DJ Mike Gonsalves, Dr. Metal, the MC for the night. So, just 5 months after the fire, the band went on a tour. Each tour began with a prayer for the survivors and families of the victims and raised money for the station's family fund. They also retired the song Desert Moon, which was the song that was playing when the fire started. Unfortunately, no amount of reparations or level of criminal punishment can make up for the emotional toll the accident took on the victims, their family, and even some of the people that were litigated. Many who escaped the fire now struggle with PTSD. Those who lost a family member or friend will now never get them back, and Daniel Bichelle has talked about how that night is one he will never forget. Some good things came out of the situation in the form of regulations, though, if you could look at them as such. For one, the then governor of Rhode Island suspended use of pyrotechnics at venues that hold fewer than 300 people. More importantly, it became unlawful for a nightclub in the state with a capacity over 150 people to not have a sprinkler system. The station nightclub fire was more than just a tragedy. It was a harsh lesson, a reminder of what single mistake, a single moment, can turn a celebration into a nightmare. If you've made it this far, thank you. In this following clip, I will play the video and audio. For context, I have done research and can determine who this woman is. All I can say is, rest in peace.